Hello and welcome back to another conversation in the series on modern slavery. This time we're going to explore what is being done to counter modern slavery today. Joining me again is Dale Campbell, Tearfund NZ Education Specialist. Welcome, Dale.
How you doing?
As we've seen in the previous conversations, the reality of modern slavery, it's pretty depressing, for lack of a better term. And the numbers are terrible, right? So roughly estimated 40 million people enslaved, $250 billion annually being generated from that. And of that 250, about 150 coming from sexual exploitation. If I'm honest, it feels like it's a pretty insurmountable task to fight this.
I think that is an understandable feeling, for sure.
But, there is hope, right? We, around the world, people, governments, NGOs, we're all fighting valiantly to stop this major injustice. Can you maybe share a little bit about what's happening in terms of high-level policy, or what are the governments doing around the world, or NGOs doing to help stop this big, what feels like insurmountable beast?
Sure thing. There'd be two things that I could mention. Back in 1926, you have the Slavery Convention that abolishes the slave trade and slavery. Then you have the Palermo Protocol, which criminalized trafficking and even attempted trafficking. Now, as well as this, you have the International Labour Organization, which has conventions on forced labor. And of course, the UN has conventions on trafficking, exploitation, child rights, you name it, they've covered it.
That's awesome. And as great as it is that all these things are in place, we still see the numbers rising, though, right? And it feels like, although we're doing this stuff, we're not quite getting there. Why is the progress so slow?
Well, it's one thing to say that slavery shouldn't happen, it's another thing to end it, of course. So these things are meant to be legally binding, but their effectiveness is limited because the legal systems in these countries have to be robust enough to actually enact the obligations of these conventions.
And I know another area where there's quite a lot of action being taken to fight modern slavery is through in supply chain, right? So it seems like in recent times there's been a lot more light shed on these end companies taking responsibility. It seems like quite a lot's happening in this space, which is exciting. Can you share a little bit more about some examples of that?
That's right, yeah. So over the past few years, various countries have introduced legislation. They often call it a Modern Slavery Act or something like that. And what this does is it forces the companies to have a degree of transparency about their supply chains, and it holds them to account. And so companies become legally required to take steps to firstly understand the modern slavery risks that exist in their supply chain, and then take action and actually publicly report on it.
So legally they're obliged to know where their things are coming from.
That's right.
To know who's producing whatever, it might be coffee or a pair of jeans or whatnot.
Yes.
They can no longer turn a blind eye and allow this exploitation to bump their profits up.
Absolutely. So for example, just in 2020, Australia's Modern Slavery Act resulted in 3,000 companies being required to report on the risks of modern slavery in their operations and their supply chains, as well as the actions they're taking to address those risks. And so this information is actually public on Australia's government website. And the government has the power to identify any companies that are not compliant on this. And so this level of transparency is amazing, and it's the first step to a real accountability, and it puts public pressure on companies to implement effective change over time. And I guess we just need that kind of legislation here in Aotearoa.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not wrong there. And to be honest, it can't come soon enough, right? But in the meantime, though, we've got organisations like Tearfund working really hard to end modern slavery. Can you tell us a little bit about what Tearfund's doing and their approach?
Totally. We call it the 5P approach. I just love it. The 5 Ps are prevention, prosecution, protection, policy, and partnership. And it sees real results, it's comprehensive, and it's one of the reasons why my wife and I are personally so committed to this work addressing modern slavery.
Okay, so let's break it down. So we've got the 5 Ps, first one being prevention, right? So how do we put a fence at the top of the cliff rather than being the ambulance down the bottom?
It's a great metaphor. Prevention is about stopping exploitation before it even happens. It's addressing the reasons why people end up vulnerable to trafficking. So for example, since poverty makes people vulnerable to trafficking, things like income generation initiatives and women's empowerment groups, those things are also trafficking prevention initiatives. Other examples like local communities creating safe migration strategies, or ensuring that ethnic minorities are able to become citizens, working to shift cultural perceptions around gender to empower women and girls. All of these things make communities more resilient against trafficking and exploitation.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I love it. It sounds so intentional. Okay, so if we got prevention, next P is prosecution, right? So I guess that's the part where we're going to, hunt down the perpetrators, the people responsible for trafficking, these people. So tell us about that.
So this is slow, hard work, takes time, takes money. Careful investigation, relationship building with trusted local authorities like police. There's robust legal work. It's all in the mix. And when a trafficker is prosecuted, it also deters other potential offenders. There's also work being done to keep illegal trafficking income that is generated from flowing effortlessly through international financial systems. It's incredibly hard, but it's worth every penny.
It's great to know that this work is being done. So next we've got another P. So we've got prevention, prosecution, and the next one, after the survivors have been freed and cared for, they need to be protected, right?
Yeah, for one, they're actually at risk of being trafficked again. Also, even in their home communities, there can be intense stigma and discrimination, especially for women who are returning from the sex trade. When sex is a taboo topic, exploited women can be seen as dirty or impure. So protection also means things like legal, educational, or employment support to help them reintegrate back into their communities safely and with dignity.
That's awesome. So we've got prevention, we've got prosecution, we've got protection. Next P is for policy. And I guess that's the level that we're trying to reform the legal and governmental policies, right? So making sure that we're getting it right in terms of the policy and law for the work against modern slavery. So tell us a little bit about that P.
The abolitionist William Wilberforce, he knew how important policy was, and we can follow in his footsteps. It's hard work though. Policy changes have to be based on research, actual data. So for example, within domestic legislation, things like trafficking have to be legally and well defined so that there are no legal loopholes. Prosecutors can be effective and they can bring offenders to justice.
Now the final P. So we got prevention, prosecution, protection, policy, and our partnership.
Well done.
I like this one. It was good, Ted. I like this one. So, as we know, this is going to be a team effort, right? We're going to need other people on board. Tell us about the partnership approach.
It takes NGOs, governments, it takes supporters, funders, police, lawyers, judges, counselors, community leaders to get this done. Anti-trafficking alliances are a great way for agencies to collaborate and do a better job together.
Is there an example of how Tearfund implements the 5P approach that you can share with us?
Absolutely. We have a comprehensive program based in Asia and the Pacific that integrates all 5 Ps, as well as agricultural livelihood work to reduce communities' vulnerabilities. It involves 6 projects across 5 countries and is delivered through our partner organizations. Through this program, our partners are able to do things like develop community-based prevention and aftercare networks and work with communities to increase livelihood opportunities. That last one's really important with regard to prevention because families are able to increase their income. And as we've discussed, this means they become less vulnerable to trafficking and can better withstand things like natural disasters and conflict.
That's awesome. So the 5 Ps, we've got prevention, prosecution, protection, policy, and partnership.
Nailed it.
Nailed it. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing. Stick around for the last 3 videos as we explore how to make sure our lives aren't exacerbating the modern slavery problem.